For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host Jade Black, and I don't know if this is true where you all are, but it's suddenly gotten really hot, probably because, schools have just gone back when I'm recording this, so yay, we love that. The reason I'm mentioning this is because if you can hear increased traffic noise in the background, usually I record with my window closed to try and avoid it, but it's way too hot for that today. But it's not too hot for tea, and that is what I am talking about today. It's the most British episode of this podcast yet. I am, in fact, British, not Australian. You have thought I'm Australian for all this time? Please tell me why, because I get it all the time, and I just don't get it. And the other reason I want to talk about tea today, besides, just being British, I guess, is because tea is really important to me as a writer, while drafting, and also in world. It plays a huge cultural role in the Determined Ones, and I am going to be talking about some notable moments involving tea a bit later on. So make sure you stay tuned for that. So one thing I have mentioned on Twitter before is having a particular tea per project. And this is a sort of tea that I will drink either while drafting or a little bit before, or even just in a sort of brainstorming, thought showering, fun with that, sort of session to get myself in the mood. And this is something that started pretty early on with Mr. Nakagami, so quite late in the sort of grand scheme of my writing career thus far. Because I was in this shop that I really like that sells all sorts of East Asian foods, so like tofu and mushrooms and just vegan fish sauce and just all kinds of weird shit. And things that, I just genuinely have never heard of. I don't know how weird it would be to people from those parts of the world, but it's weird to British old me. Anyhow, they were stocking this tea. Is that not? No, it is. It was jasmine green. And I thought I have to pick that up because Haru wears jasmine perfume. I just thought I should pick that up and just see what it's like. And it was delicious. I still love that tea to this day. I still buy it. I'm looking forward to the next time I buy it because that won't be too long in the future. Every time I drank it, it made me think of Haru and think of Mr. Nakagami. And I found it really helped me get words down. And so I've just carried that forward ever since. So with Snakebite, it was Lapsang Souchong. For those that don't know, that's a very smoky tea because Hanzo smokes. It's kind of that simple. I did sort of, I think, more subconsciously do this with a lavender tea. Because there is a tea in Black Executioner that has lavender in it that I drinks on occasion. I don't want to say too much about that because spoilers. Let's jump into a bit of world building here and talk about the cultural significance of tea. Because most of the stories I've written so far in the Determined Ones do centre in Hyukai, and that is true of the compendium overall. There are a couple of books that are outside of Hyukai. There's one in South Yordavik, which is Beneath the Moon. I've mentioned that. And In the Eyes of the Desert is set in the desert nation of Maliso, pretty obviously, but tea is also important there. Tea is one of those things that just everybody drinks kind of all the time. It's sort of people's just go to, oh, do you want to drink? Okay, I'll make tea. It's not even, do you want tea or coffee, necessarily. And in Hyukai in particular, it's just, plain green tea most of the time, unsweetened, no milk is how they drink it there. If you put sugar in green tea, you'll probably get an odd look. If you put milk in it, you'll probably get deported. Don't know how much of a joke that is. In Malasal, it tends to be more spiced black teas, so things like chai, or sometimes plain black tea like Assam as well, things they drink there. Hiraeth also has a big tea culture, so again, that's sort of black tea mostly, and also sort of fruit teas, but I'll get onto that in a minute. Tea is pretty easy to find everywhere. In some places it might be difficult to get green tea, so basically the further south you go, the harder it is to find it. So trying to find green tea in Malasao is pretty difficult, which is a terrible shame, but black tea you can get pretty much anywhere. Some of the more herbal and fruit teas might be a bit more localised within nations, or potentially even within regions of nations, because some of them can be pretty specialist. It's something that a lot of artisans do, is sort of, this is my sort of signature blend of tea. They might only sell it in the one tea room or the one shop. I suspect some farms also have their own signature blends of tea. And another thing I want to talk about in terms of cultural significance of tea, you can get both tea bag tea and loose leaf tea in just about every nation. I think loose leaf is probably a bit more common, but again, don't quote me on that because I can't say with certainty that that's the case. But it's definitely more common amongst older people. Just, I guess, tradition as much as anything, and it's more common in certain nations as well. So in Hukai, the chance that you'll be drinking tea from a tea bag is pretty low. And so a lot of stuff is made in teapots. And when you are having tea with someone and it's from a pot, in Hukai, the person who is sort of lower status pours the tea. So be that, you know, because it's going to be a work thing, your assistant pours your tea for you. If it's unclear, generally the person who's younger will pour it. If it's super unclear, you're the same age and a similar status, it sort of doesn't really matter. Sometimes people sort of compete to get there first, so show their respect. It's very much an I respect you, so I'll pour your tea thing. If you don't, that can be a real societal faux pas. And I will talk about that later on, because it does happen in the determined ones. In Malasao, it's the opposite, which can be a little bit confusing for dignitaries and things. In Malasao, the person who's more senior will pour the tea as a sort of showing an appreciation for the person below them's service. Like, it's a nice little custom to just say, oh, thank you for your loyalty and stuff like that. And that will generally be true of parents pouring tea for their children and stuff like that. Although that one can be a bit more unclear. So let's talk about particular teas for a moment here, because I've mentioned things like Assam and chai and Lapsang Souchong, and all of those things do actually exist in world. This is all Canaan tea. Canaan tea is, known. Canaan is known for its tea. There's a variety of tea for each island, with the exception of Lapsang Souchong, which is a blend of teas from Lapsang and from Souchong. So all of the Canaan islands have a tea named for them. So Assam is Assam tea, chai is chai tea. So Assam is just plain black Assam leaves, whereas chai has spices and stuff blended into it, as we know. And that's where the majority of the tea on the continent really probably comes from. Green tea is probably pretty exclusively grown in Hukai, but I suspect it is also grown elsewhere, just on the down low, so to speak. Hirivian tea, sort of tea that's actually grown in Hiraeth, I don't know whether it technically counts as tea. Some of them will have actual tea in them, some of them won't, so I don't know how much you can, technically speaking, call that tea. Hiraeth is really big on herbal and sort of fruit blend teas. So you'll get things like blackberry and apple tea and stuff like that, which may or may not have any tea in them. It's more of just a sort of infusion. That's what something. It's a name that people use around here, at least. And herbal teas as well. So you'll get things like nettle tea or lavender tea or whatnot, and that's really, really popular in Hiraeth. That has sort of spread elsewhere. So that's now becoming quite popular in Hukai and in the area quite a lot as well. And it's not to say that other nations don't do exactly the same thing, but particularly the fruit tea is very much a big thing in Hiraeth, and it's something they're quite known for. There is also a mention of pine needle tea that isn't on this board, that is drunk by people in South Fjordvik quite a lot, and in northern UK as well, which technically again doesn't have tea in it, it's basically just pine needles and water. It's not something I've ever actually had, me, as a person, but I'd like to because I'm curious. I've heard it's rather nice. If you've had it, in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on it, whether I should try it or not, because I'm curious. Okay, so let's move away from the actual tea itself for a minute, and let's talk a little bit about where you'll drink tea. So, there is mentioned a lot of times in Mr. Nakagami and Snakebite, and I think also in Penstemon, that in the town hall sub-government offices where those people work, there is a counter in the reception where you can just make yourself tea and it's free, it's just there. But there are also specific places where you can go to drink tea, so there are tea rooms in just about every nation, I think. And Yuki's tea rooms are a little bit unique on this one. Not just because of the way they decorate things, like there's a lot of seasonal decor around in the continent in general, but it's very much a thing in Hukai, and especially in tea rooms. They'll often completely redecorate the entire building with seasons. They'll repaint doors and walls and have different artwork and different, strings of flowers and all sorts of things that change with the seasons. It's really, really pretty. I love it. And the other thing with Yuki's tea rooms is there are sort of two kinds. There's the Imperial tea room and the, contemporary tea room. So the sort of contemporary tea room is something that you or I, in the UK at least, would be used to, where it's just, tables dotted around and you go and order tea and bring it to your table. Some of them will have table service, but it's pretty unlikely. That's seen as very quaint in UK. Imperial-style tea rooms are what you might think of for us as a sort of traditional Japanese tea room, where, low tables and you sit on the floor and all of that. They're not very common in the capital or in the south in general. That's much more of a northern thing. But that's not to say you can't find them. There is a particular tea room that is mentioned in a couple of the books. So it's mentioned by name in Snakebite, and also in Penstemon. It's alluded to in Miss Nakagami, but I don't believe the name appears. It's called The Rose, and that's more of a contemporary tea room, but it's just very nice, and it felt like it was worth a mention. The other thing that's very unique to Hukai with tea rooms is something called an Emperor's Room. And usually tea rooms will have at least two. And this is also something you can find in Yuki's restaurants. And it is something that you do, generally speaking, have to book in advance. There are these little rooms, generally at the back or sometimes on the side of the building, on the inside, for what it's worth. It's not literally just a room tacked on the outside, that has a sliding door, so you can just be in your tea room or in your restaurant completely in privacy. And you can just talk, and generally they're somewhat soundproofed as well. And those will have table service, so that you can go to your Emperor's Room, wait for somebody, order some tea, it'll be brought, and all that jazz. And by the time the other person arrives, usually the waiter will come around again, make sure you've got everything you need, be that cake. If you've run out of cake, that is obviously a travesty. And this is, as the name might suggest, a hang-up from Imperial times, because this is something the Emperor used to do quite a lot, was have meetings with people he probably shouldn't have, definitely in hindsight, in tea rooms, and obviously he was the Emperor, so privacy was needed for that. And you don't have to have any particular job or social status or anything to book an Emperor's Room, you can just do that. And a good classic tradition that people use Emperor's Rooms for is things like engagements. Because, proposals in restaurants are a thing. People in Hukai don't really do public proposals. That's very much frowned upon. And if people want to get engaged in a restaurant, an emperor's room is a pretty classic way of doing it. If you see someone in an emperor's room in a restaurant, that is probably exactly what's happening, or they're just on a date and want some privacy. Something like that. It's rarely used for diplomatic purposes anymore, but it does still happen every now and then. I'm going to go on to notable tea moments a little bit earlier than I always say. This podcast has a plan, like, oh yes, I planned this board out. We all know that's not true. So let's talk about notable tea moments here. And while we're on the topic of the Emperor's Room, let's go to one that actually happened in the Emperor's Room, and this is Coney and Hanzo in Penstemon. It doesn't get a mention in Snakebite because it's just not really important for that part of the story of the Determined Ones. So they are actually in an Emperor's Room together. Coney gets there first, and then Hanzo sort of arrives, and Hanzo makes it clear that he's paying because, you know, he has money at that point in his life, and Coney also does, but it's like, well, I clearly have more money than you do, so I should pay for this. And when the tea arrives, they both order tea and cake. This is actually in the Rose, I do believe. Because Coney is the rank of diplomat, and Hanzo at that point is a minister, which is 2+ ranks above him, Coney obviously is supposed to pour the tea. And because Hanzo has effectively just like pissed Coney off, he doesn't. The tea's brought out and Coney just watches Hanzo. It's like Loki stares at him. And Hanzo thinks this is funny. He just laughs and says, Nagashima's taught you well, obviously referring to Ai Nagashima because Ai's Coney's boss. And they just stalemate there and keep sort of snipping at each other a bit and talking until Coney relents. This is effectively, it turns into Hanzo testing Coney to see what his breaking point is. It's like, no, you're not going to get me on this one. It's one of my favourite moments in Penstemon and was only added super recently. Another notable tea moment, I do believe this is also in the Rose, is Haru and Hanzo end up having tea together. Hanzo sort of drags Haru into it. It's all a bit weird. And it's not really anything plot important, but it's sort of character important. They just basically sit and have tea together very publicly to prove a point. Well, Hanzo phrases this as gentlemanly rivals. It's really hard for me to talk about this without giving massive spoilers for both Mr. Nakagami and Snakebite, because it does appear in both. But one of them interprets this as just a sort of nice, chill moment, but also a fuck you to, like, everybody. And the other is on edge the whole time. I'll leave it up to you to decide who's who on that one. Third notable tea moment, Hanzo and his tea. He's here again. This is Hanzo with Lady Asuka, and again, I do think this is in the Rose, maybe. And I don't know if I've mentioned Lady Asuka on this podcast before, so let me give you a little bit of a lowdown on her. She's a Hyuki's noble, one of the Ishikawa family, who are the nobles of the province that nobles of the province that includes the capital. And she is an ally of Hanzo after a little while, Snakebite. So they decide to have tea together one time on one of Hanzo's very rare days off. I believe this is shortly after the war. And it's again the sort of thing where they're meeting very publicly, but they're both somewhat in disguise, because Hanzo is off, and therefore he's not wearing all his fancy suits in the same way. Like Hanzo does, like, if he goes out, he wears a suit most of the time. And he is wearing one, but by that point he is known for wearing suits with lots of embroidery, and sometimes they're quite loud, and they have lots of colours and things, and I believe in that. I'm not sure it's explicitly mentioned, but he's effectively just wearing a plain suit. so nobody would necessarily think it was him. He is quite a distinct looking guy, but the first thing people are going to notice is, you know, a bright red suit with copper leaves on it. That's one that he likes a lot, though I've never actually drawn. Maybe I should. And Lady Asuka, being a noble, often wears, you know, kimonos and yukatas and bits of makeup and things. Makeup in Hyukai is very much a thing of the nobles. The common people rarely wear it. I mean, it does happen every now and again, but like, not really. And Hanzo has been known to wear makeup to, you know, go to functions involving nobles, because it's kind of the done thing. But he does also just sometimes wear it anyway, because he likes it. He's that flamboyantly... I don't know, he's weird. But we knew that. But she, in that moment, she is wearing a kimono, which again is generally associated with nobility, but not always. But she's not wearing makeup, for the sole purpose of people not realising who she is. And Hanzo is just wearing a plain suit and no makeup for the same reason. So they're, in a sense, meeting very publicly, but also very low-key, and I like the world building around it. And last but not least, we got Shinichi and Rook. This is a moment I wrote relatively recently, where they're having tea together after a horrific assault, really, right at the beginning of the war. And they're just bickering to hell. And I actually posted, as of recording this today, a little one-line snip. No, actually it was yesterday. I'm a competent at days of the week, I promise. I'm not. Every day is Tuesday. Apart from Tuesday, which is Wednesday, but, you know. And Shinichi and Rook have some history together, because Shinichi is an assassin, and so is Rook. And she actually taught him for a bit, because at the start of the war, Shinichi's like 22, give or take, and Rook is 40-odd. She's quite a lot older than him. So they know each other, and they're just like bickering, sort of laugh or you cry kind of deal, trying to distract themselves. And one of the conversations that comes up during that moment is, okay, well, the hospital doesn't have enough beds. Sort of medic 10 or whatnot doesn't have enough beds, so some of the wounded are going to have to sleep in the, like, dorm, basically. Who's gonna share a bed? There's not only one bed, but there are not enough beds. And so Rook effectively starts hitting on people, like, straight away, because she's a horny lady. And Shinichi actually calls her on this. It's basically like, you really want to share a bed with one of your former students. And she's not very happy about him saying this in front of a couple of the other elites. And then he just pushes her and says, well, it's not the first time you've done it. Which I didn't know until he said that, so that was interesting. So then she turns away from him and turns to Albatross, and tries to hit on him, and the one line I posted was him saying, I don't think my wife would be very happy about that. So basically Rook just gets completely annihilated, and for what it's worth, Shinichi and Albatross do end up sharing instead. So let's get on to character preferences with tea, and I have mentioned the whole green tea, you don't sweeten your green tea, you don't put milk in your green tea thing, so that's kind of... I'm not counting that because it's somewhat irrelevant. Let's talk about Ai Nagashima here, because he does prefer green tea to black tea, but he'll happily drink black tea. He doesn't sweeten black tea either. He doesn't put milk in it, of course. Much as anything, because he's just used to not sweetening his tea. Curtis is the opposite. Curtis has... I cringe at saying this. He has 3 sugars in all of his tea. Which is kind of... Actually... If we look into Curtis's backstory, his parents were very much of the view of, you do not sweeten your tea. Like, basically sweetening your tea is a sin. Curtis has a sweet tooth, but regardless of that, as much as anything, him sweetening his tea is just a fuck you. It's just that very, very quiet rebellion that's very typical of Curtis, and I love him for it. Helga is also interesting with tea, because she has drunk pine needle tea for many, many years as a nomad and all that, but her favourite tea is this cinnamon tea. It might have apple in it, but I don't think so. I think it's basically just plain cinnamon. And it's not a tea that I've actually come across before. I don't know whether this is a specifically South Fjordavan tea, or whether she makes it herself. I genuinely don't know. I believe she does sweeten it a little bit, because I think otherwise it would be difficult to take as much as anything. But yeah, I just wanted to mention the cinnamon tea because I thought it sounded nice. And if you're watching the accompanying video, you can see I've got no milk on the board because milk in tea is a sin. If you put the milk in first, get out. I'm only half joking. No, I'm joking a bit more than that, but if you actually put the milk in before the water, no. There's something wrong with you. I'm going to go on a little side tangent while we're here about tea on coffee, because I don't really have enough about coffee to do a whole episode on it, but it was something that I want to talk about a little bit, because Haru is a low-key coffee addict. The man loves his coffee. Like, he loves his tea as well. He really likes plain green tea, or there's a lemon tea that he drinks as well that's mentioned in Miss Nekagami, I believe, after the war crime trials, but don't quote me on that, I might have that slightly wrong. But Haru, with his coffee, if it's not Payne's Stripper, he doesn't want it. Strong black coffee or go home. No sweeteners, no milk, none of that. Black coffee. And he'll drink too much of it, like, every day. Like, he has 4 or 5, I think. There is a moment in Miss Nakagami where he sort of ponders, am I drinking too much coffee? Well, doctors don't say this amount's harmful. Most doctors don't. He loves his coffee as much as anything. He does sort of feel the need for it because he doesn't sleep very well because of knee pains and things that keep him up. But he also just really likes it. Hanzo, however, doesn't. He just really... And that kind of surprises me because he likes flavours like elderflower a lot. He doesn't like coffee. So it's the sort of thing where, because caffeine and whatnot, he would like to drink it, but he can't make his way through a mug of coffee. I don't think his stomach likes it very much, either. And a third point about coffee, Ai Nagashima is allergic to coffee, which is something I didn't know until I was drafting Miss Nakagami. And it's not a severe allergy by any means. Basically, if he drinks coffee, his tongue swells up, and it's weird. And it's not a moment that's ever properly on page in Miss Nakagami. I do want to write a short of it. Yeah, there is a bit of a scare that he has with Haru, because basically he's just tired one day, and Haru's like, do you want to try? And he's like, okay, and then there's, okay, I'm having an allergic reaction, fuck, this is not funny. And it is alluded to, but we don't ever actually see it on page in the determined ones. I think that's about all I have for today. So we're going to move on to the interview plug. As always, if you are published or well on the way, please do get in touch. I do this only via email now. There are still some sort of older episodes I recorded a while ago that have it as, you can contact me on Twitter for that. Please don't. It is email now only, really. jade42black@gmail.com. That is on the screen for what it's worth. There is a list of stuff I want to know first in the description below. Please read that. I don't want to give automatic no's if and when I get inundated, as much as anything else. Doesn't have to be a new book. It doesn't have to be out yet, either. I'm happy to talk about stuff for pre-order dates opening, or a short while before launch, whatever. I'm chill about that. It also doesn't have to be a novel. Short story collections and poetry and anthologies and all sorts of stuff is welcome. If you want to talk about it, bring it in. If you wanted to do a sort of overview episode of a trilogy or something like that, I'm sure I could make it work. Let's talk. It also doesn't have to be adult. I write exclusively adult literature, but I think it would be really interesting to talk to people who write kid lit or MG or even YA to see what that is like, because I don't do it and I never really have. So it would just be interesting to know how people handle it as much as anything else. If you've got some kid-lit haiku anthology, that'd be really interesting to talk about. last but certainly not least, if you are looking for me elsewhere, this is where you can find me. If you are looking for the home of the podcast, which you probably are if you're here, that is Instagram. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. On Instagram for the podcast home, you will get advance notice of what the episode is for the week. I do that on Monday, and there are also teaser sort of soundbite reels that go out as well, often in advance. If you are looking for the home of my writing, if that interests you, that is Twitter, JadeBlack21 on there. If you're looking for more art-related stuff, that is BlueSky, JadeBlack21. But that is about all I have for now. I hope you have gained at least one British point from watching or listening to this episode, and for now, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Copyright Jade Black 2023.